Well, I've been occupied with certain complications lately. Sorry about that, and I'm glad to be back. There is a story within the last few weeks that I want to understand because at the headline level, it's completely preposterous, so perfectly suitable for the times. Per a press release on October 11th, the Justice Department announces it is suing the state of Virginia for removing voters from the voter rolls too close to the election. But exactly who are the voters this program is targeting? Non-citizens. In other words, not voters, or people who can't vote legally. Wow, why oh why would our federal government concern itself with protecting the supposed voting rights of people who actually have no such thing in a potentially competitive state that would be a death blow to the Kamala campaign were she to lose it, even if that is unlikely? I think politically, we can all surmise an answer for that question, but I still want to understand the technical. What even is the supposed legal argument here? How are they doing this with a straight face? Well, in August, Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin issued an executive order to enforce existing state law to maintain valid and accurate voter rolls, including a system for the removal of non-citizens from the voter rolls. Non-citizens can sometimes register either accidentally or intentionally. In fact, Youngkin said this process identified and removed 6,300 non-citizens from voter registration in Virginia. How could such people even get registered in the first place? Well, under federal law, anybody who visits a DMV for a driver's license must be offered the opportunity to register to vote. And keep in mind, non-citizens often have a perfectly valid reason to apply for a driver's license. We're not necessarily talking about illegal immigrants. We're talking about people who are legally here, temporarily or otherwise, who do have legal access to a driver's license while they're here. There is a box on the DMV paperwork that asks about citizenship. Any non-citizen can't register to vote, but of course there are errors and potential abuse. That's what Youngkin is looking to clean up. To emphasize, this voter cleanup effort in Virginia is not targeting people suspected of being fraudulently registered. These are people who self-identified on paperwork as non-citizens and yet are still registered to vote. That is an obvious discrepancy according to these falsely registered voters themselves, not according to some state targeting campaign. And this is not some made-up executive order either. This is just the enforcement of existing Virginia law, signed by Hillary running mate Democrat Tim Kaine when he was governor in 2006. Virginia's law provides for the state election board to cross-reference any person listed as a non-citizen on a DMV form with their voter registration records to make sure those people are not on the voter rolls. And to ensure that the state is not mistaken about citizenship status, they also cross-reference with Homeland Security data that show whether a legal alien resident has obtained citizenship in the meantime. In other words, the state flags non-citizens, but then follows up with the feds to make sure they aren't accidentally removing legally registered voters. They're being careful both ways. No illegal voters, but no wrongful denial of the vote either. And the state takes further steps to protect the rights of those legally entitled to vote. They don't just delete people. Any person facing removal from the voter rolls gets a letter saying they have 14 days to show that they are a citizen and stay registered. If the person fails to demonstrate citizenship, they get a second letter, so they actually have 3 weeks to follow up. And even if the person misses the letters or just forgets, they still have opportunity to vote if they were wrongfully removed from registration. They had until October 15th to register again, but even now, there is still same-day in-person registration available to them, provided they can demonstrate citizenship.
They have one last safeguard, which is they can come and same-day register and cast a provisional ballot.
They have 14 days to prove that they are actually eligible to vote. And I then gave you the fail-safe caveat that they can come on election day and vote.
Okay, so if this was already the law in Virginia and this verification program was already in operation, what did Youngkin's executive order actually change? All it did was authorize the relevant state departments to share data daily instead of monthly, to keep the voter rolls as clean as possible heading into the election. All right, so if this law has existed and been enforced in Virginia for years, why are the feds suddenly interested in trying to stop it? Their potential political motives aside, their official explanation is that Virginia's enforcement violates federal voting rights law. They say that under the National Voter Registration Act, the quiet period provision prohibits states from executing systematic voter registration purges within 90 days of federal elections. It's just Virginia's timing, in other words. If they did this in the spring or last year, it would have been fine. But since they're doing it so close to an election, that causes confusion in the electorate and risks disenfranchising qualified voters. Some problems with that claim. First of all, it's new. If this law has existed and been enforced in Virginia for almost 2 decades, including immediately prior to elections before, according to the governor.
This is under a law in Virginia that's been in effect since 2006. It has been applied by Republican and Democrat governors alike into this 90-day period.
Why haven't the feds had a problem with it until now? And speaking of timing, even in this particular case, during this particular election, why do the feds suddenly have a problem with it now? Because Youngkin issued and implemented this order on August 7th, over 2 months before the feds' legal interest in it. They filed their lawsuit on October 11th. If causing confusion and chaos right before an election is a big legal problem, then why are the feds doing exactly that? Why did they wait and sit on their legal case until the very same 11th hour that they warn about? But to the substance of the argument, the reason the feds have not cared about this law until now is, of course, because it is not actually a violation of federal law. Federal law prohibits systematic removal of voter registration within 90 days of the election. But that's not what this is. This is individualized review of registration based on information from the registrant. That person said, hey, just so you know, I am not a citizen, which might be worth a follow-up in that individual case. More importantly, though, how could it be that federal voter registration law was even intended to protect wrongful non-citizen registration? It wasn't, and it hasn't been interpreted or applied that way. Indeed, the federal law in question lists in its purposes section the goal of promoting the exercise of the right of citizens of the United States to vote. The law provides that any eligible applicant for voter registration with a valid voter registration form will have certain protections. But in this case, these were never citizens eligible for valid voter registration in the first place, and thus the law's protections, including the quiet period provision, don't apply to them. People with no existing right to vote were never intended to have the protection of this law. Indeed, pretending they were produces ridiculous outcomes. Given this new interpretation, it is not at all clear how exactly the feds expect Virginia or any other state to remove non-citizens from their voter rolls at all. Because if we grant the premise that non-citizens are included in the statutory definition of voter registrant, as the Fed argument does, well, non-citizens apparently can't be removed from the voter rolls at any time, ever. Because under the same federal law, states can only remove voters from registration rolls for 4 reasons: the request of the registrant, as provided by state law because of criminal conviction or mental incapacity, or because the registrant died or moved away. So if non-citizens are on the rolls, and the feds now say that these non-citizen registrations enjoy the protection of federal law, their brand new argument, well, then these wrongful registrations can't be removed ever, at least for that non-citizen reason, because citizenship status is not a valid reason for removal under their new interpretation. Virginia's lawyers characterize that outcome as absurd, which it is, but of course, absurd is almost certainly the intent. Because even more absurdly, on Friday, Biden-appointed U.S. District Court Judge Patricia Tolliver-Giles agreed with the feds and ordered Virginia to return non-citizens to its voter rolls. Now, how is it that federal law protects the voter registration of non-citizens, according to this judge? Well, because there's no explicit exception for them in the law otherwise. So since the law's authors didn't explicitly say, hey, by the way, this law doesn't protect non-citizens registering to vote because that would be stupid, it must actually protect non-citizens registering to vote. Virginia has now appealed that decision to the Fourth Circuit and to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court was supposed to respond by 1 p.m. Tuesday. I didn't see that happen, so I'm not clear what the current status is, but unless something changes immediately, Virginia will be forced to restore the voter registration of people who, by their own declaration, were not eligible to register or vote at all because they are not citizens of this country, because that's the protection of your rights somehow. Your right to have your vote diluted or canceled out entirely by a foreign national with no legal right to cast a vote at all. Oh, but it's so rare, our journalistic fact checkers insist. It hardly ever happens, so why are you so worried about it? Yeah, and so is murder. Statistically, it's very unlikely to happen to you. But it's still an injustice if it does, and so we prosecute it, and maybe we even try to prevent it where we can. That's exactly what's happening in this case with the potential for illegal voting. But that is the incoherence. Your right to vote is fundamental, even sacred.
We who believe in the sacred freedom to vote. We who believe in the sacred freedom to vote. The sacred freedom to vote.
But also, if your sacred right gets canceled out by the abuse of it, oh well, it happens. But it's rare, so get over it. Well, if it's sacred, then the abuse of it even once is a sacred violation. Oh, it is sacred, but also totally inconsequential if violated, at least in this particular way. But hey, maybe I'm the idiot for calling that incoherence. Is that actually a contradiction, or is that just a preview for the total reversal that we're about to watch? Tune in next week to find out just how sacred your right to vote actually is. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel. Always appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below, and especially over on X. That is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to come out and chat in my live streams. Those live on Wednesday and Sunday nights. Looking forward to it. Goodbye.